is David Barrera, aka Dr. Barrera. And I've known David for a better part of more than 20 years. And we actually worked together about 20 years ago in the Nueces County Psychiatric Hospital that some of the cops would jokingly call the armpit of Nueces County.
Well, thanks for having me, James. I'm not sure what else I can add. I mean, we worked together a long time ago. In the early 90s, I was a Houston police officer. That feels like a whole nother life and a whole nother person. And then, of course, after getting out of that line of work, I cut grass for a while and went back to school. And those were some great times. Kids were little, and money was tight, and it forms a lot of character when you're dealing with those kind of situations. And then, of course, working in psych triage, what we called psych triage, and together night shift, it was kind of a continuation of all the excitement and utilizing my education and my degree, my master's degree, and then going on to work in child protection and working on the PhD. That was a pretty challenging time. And I did a lot of contract work with child protection here, Department of Family and Protective Services. And that was a very rewarding time. I worked in foster care prior to that for a little while. And so I've had quite a few jobs, but the main one was working in psychiatric triage. And then later, I guess I stayed there long enough. They ran out of options and put me in charge of the psych hospital.
Yeah, so, man. And I gotta hand it to you, because have a lot of respect for your longevity and that acute level of care. I had my hand in it for a few years before I moved on to working at other different organizations with other types of levels of cares, and then doing contract work and so on and so forth. So you've been there since back when I first met you working there, and you probably worked there. My goodness, I can't even keep up. Almost 20 years just in that one department. Right. Hey, and just for some perspective for people who think that's maybe not necessarily a real long time, it's actually it's not just a quantitative measurement, it's a qualitative way of looking at it, because the acuity of behaviors you deal with and this situation with a psychiatric triage, it's a lot to take on. So definitely you got to be a unique individual to have the temperament, right, to last that long in that field. Look at some differences as far as how you've used your skill set, if you will, and just your personality within two different contexts. Over the last few years, there's been like a lot of pressure for police officers.
Yeah, it's a really extensive topic. And I was a police officer in the early 90s, and so things have changed extensively. And policing in a world where there were no cell phones, there were no cameras. Of course, it was right after the Rodney King incident that I became a police officer, right after the OJ situation. So the cameras at that time were these huge kind of VCR type carrying cameras. And so it was just a very different world. There wasn't the kind of what's the word? Like you mentioned, things were not under the microscope in the same way that they are now. So I commend police officers for the job that they do, because it's a very difficult job, and they are under a microscope all the time. And in a way, it's a good thing. But I have my own opinions. This kind of discussion can go down numerous avenues, because I have some pretty strong opinions about police work in regards to what I think, because I know personality. I know how personality develops. I know how me and my friends that were in our early 20s kind of reacted to these to this exposure of this violent this job that can become very violent, that has such an impact on the development of the personality. And a lot of people say, well, personality develops, and by the time you're a young adult, it develops. But I can tell you, I've seen so many circumstances where, you have a person that has a really kind of agreeable, likable personality, and then you put them into ongoing violent situations, high stress, this is why you see the divorce rate is so high with police officers. The suicide rate is so high with police officers, and not only this, but other professions where it's very stressful. And then you have, really the issue of how do they internalize these things. And so I work with veterans now, and it's a very similar situation where these experiences that these veterans had, even guys that I work with that are Vietnam veterans, they've compartmentalized all these experiences, and in a way, not being able to look at those situations from the accurate perspective can become very cancerous, and can affect them in numerous negative ways. And so this happens as well in mental health, like you mentioned. It can be very stressful. I know, times, we were even assaulted in the environment that we were in, by individuals that are truly mentally ill or under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and that place felt like a violent environment a lot of times. And so, it really depends on how you look at the world, how you handle those situations, and it's very important, and how you handle that stress and internalize that stress.
Yes, sir. And I have a lot of opinions about myself about the police, and I'll just go out and give some of my opinions. Is that I have a lot of respect for police officers, and part of that is because I know a lot of them. I've known a lot of them over the years, and I've actually seen how the diplomacy that they have used with how they treat people, how they carry themselves, not just when they're at work, but just in their personal life. That I always admired that. Is that if anything, the policing that I've witnessed in the community we live in is that, it's about building relationships with people. It's a different type of policing these days. And
it's a huge issue. And I think it's something that would be very important, not only for police officers, any job that they're dealing with the public. I mean, this could be nurses, it could be doctors, teachers, counselors, any firemen, you name it. But I think the education, the gathering of knowledge is extremely important. The more knowledgeable a person is, the more they have the ability to understand the situation they're dealing with. And, this is kind of my theoretical, kind of, if you'd say, philosophical foundation for how I think the world needs to be kind of developed in terms of one person dealing with another. You can have these abilities to deal with people effectively, but if you come to know yourself, then I think that the ability to deal with other people is strengthened. This concept of understanding is extremely important. Building that knowledge base, gathering as much information as you can about a situation or a person or a group or an illness, or that it's an understanding. And a lot of times it's in a sociological context, because you're dealing with homeless individuals, you're dealing with individuals with substance abuse disorders, and of course the field we work in, we deal with people who from a very early age dealt with abuse, neglect. And it doesn't mean that they came out of poor environments. These are people also that came out of very wealthy environments too. And there was maybe an emotional neglect or a physical abuse that took place, and sexual abuse. The thing is that compassion is something that is necessary, and understanding precedes compassion. If I don't have understanding of a situation, I'm going to find it very difficult to be compassionate about that situation. I need to be able to look at a situation and understand it to the best of my ability, to be able to have empathy, to be able to have compassion for that person that I'm dealing with. And I've seen police officers that did an excellent job at this. And of course, I've seen a lot of police officers that have no compassion. And I'll be honest with you, in my early 20s, uneducated, going through life difficulties, marriage difficulties, There were plenty of times that I did not have the understanding. There were plenty of times I didn't have the empathy and compassion that I needed as a young police officer. And my opinion is in a majority of situations, with all the respect I have for police officers, I think that this is an area that can be strengthened and developed and needs to be focused on. And I've seen plenty of therapists that have no understanding.
Yes.
And so this is where, as a therapist, it becomes very important to be able to know what your experience is, to know what your scope of care is, what your abilities are, to be able to say, like, hey, for this population of individuals, I don't have enough knowledge, I don't have enough understanding of a certain population, and for that reason, I'm not going to be able to be as empathetic or as compassionate as I should be. So it might be somewhere I need to kind of develop myself.
Yeah, I just love what you just said, and I actually just in 3 points made some notes about everything you just said, because it resonates with a lot of the philosophy, the way I've looked at things, and just what I've learned in my education and experiences is that it's interesting how sometimes professors, and I think back to when I was in school still, is that they can sometimes have a colorful ways of how they make a point, right? So this idea you said that we need to know ourselves, that help by knowing ourselves, we deal with other people better, 100%, right? In therapy, you hear about transference and countertransference issues. And actually, if you know what this is and you manage it, it actually can be used as a tool to help somebody, because of it's kind of like a spider sense. Hey, I'm getting this feeling of this person, right? Transference and countertransference. So one of my professors, we were talking about this idea about, do you have to be perfect yourself to be a therapist working in the mental health field? And essentially what she said is this basically this idea: do you necessarily have to have all your shit together to be a therapist, a mental health person, right? And she looks at the room and she says, well, actually, no, you don't. But you do need to know where your shit's at, right? Know yourself.
Talking about, being able to listen. And this is a key. And I think part of the really kind of the underlying problem of human nature in general, especially, and I speak for the Western culture because, I'm not that well traveled, but, the issue that we deal with in society, and I think from birth, is kind of a selfishness, this egocentrism. And so this kind of bleeds into so many other issues in relationships, because if it's about me, then it can't be about this relationship. And this is another reason you see so many situations that just kind of go south in those difficult discussions. And this kind of taking this perspective of, I'm listening, but I'm only listening so that I can respond. I'm not listening so that I can understand. I'm not listening so that I can gain some understanding or insight or knowledge from your perspective. I've already we've seen this happen, like you mentioned, kind of on both political ends of the spectrum here, over the years, and people will have in their mind what they firmly believe, and that's okay. But they get into these interactions thinking, okay, what I believe is more important than what you believe. So say whatever it is you have to say so that I can come back with an argument. And this happens, doing marital therapy too. This happens all the time. It's like, I'm going to let you finish. And in my mind, I'm making these mental notes of how I can come back at you. And a lot of times it's, with couples and also outside of that, just in relationships, I had read that, there's circumstances in which, there's communication, and that's two people getting together to determine what is right. But most of the times people get together and they get these discussions and they want to determine who is right. And so this really is kind of, I guess one of the main problems when you got one person interacting with another person, and there's a lack of understanding and a lack of desire to understand, Yeah.
And maybe this can be a bit of a segue into another topic I was interested in discussing, is people's behavior on social media, right? Because what is what is social media is, it's almost like this karma situation with whatever you put out into it, you're going to get back the algorithm, what you're going to attract on your newsfeed, your timeline. But this dismissiveness that you're describing, whether it's marital therapy and somewhat I mean, I've been guilty of that too in my life. Someone's saying something and maybe I'm feeling excited. I'm already thinking about what I'm going to say back next before maybe just actually, just like what you're saying, demonstrating that I'm understanding the situation from their point of view.
No problem. I think anytime me and you get together with conversations, it sparks like a dozen different things. I've always enjoyed having conversation with you, but the thing that, when you talk about trust and respect, this kind of goes full circle, and then I'll get into my ideas about social media.
Take your time.
So, it really kind of comes full circle too with knowing yourself, because a majority of people, their relationships and their interactions with others are failing because they don't know themselves. So if I don't trust myself, if I don't have any respect for myself, how is it possible for me to trust and respect someone else? I have great respect for you too, because I know you're very knowledgeable and experienced and educated in the fitness field, and fitness was something I never really placed. I always knew it was important, but I never placed a high value on it. But one of the things that I encourage all my clients is, if you're not taking care of yourself physically, then it's hard to take care of yourself emotionally. If I don't feel well physically, if I am pouring poison into my body on a daily basis, what do I expect to get back in terms of rest, sleep, strength, the ability to think clearly if I'm not resting, if I'm not sleeping right, if I'm diabetic and I'm, struggling with all these health issues, how can I be in a good place mentally if I'm not working to get into a good place physically? And so this is something I really encourage, and this is part of knowing the self. And it's extremely important component that, even I think a lot of therapists neglect. And when you talked about, do you have to have your shit together to be a therapist? No, you don't. Nobody completely 100% has it together. Not everybody's Gandhi and Mother Teresa.
Yeah.
But if they are awareness is key. If I'm aware of an area of my life that I need to get straight, and I don't get it together, then it's going to be very difficult as a therapist to encourage someone to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And so this goes back to the relationships. When I work on myself, when I know myself, I trust myself, I have respect for myself, I'm taking care of myself, then in regards to where I'm at mentally, I have so much a better ability. I might not be able to control. Dichotomy of control is something I really focus on in therapy. And I might not be able to control a situation in terms of relationship, but I can definitely influence in a positive way that relationship, because I'm in a good place. I'm able to make a good connection with someone, and I have more of a positive influence in that situation. And I think, there's majority of people just have very distorted ways of looking at themselves. And then that affects the way they look at the outside world around them.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a great way of framing it. And some of the things that sparked what you're saying is sparking in my mind is that knowing yourself, right? So how do we know ourselves? A lot of people may speak to those issues to know thyself, right? But our values, right? Our values. What are your core beliefs? What are your core values? Are we living a life that's congruent as possible with what we value? Sometimes we're able to, and maybe sometimes it's more challenging just because of practical realities of the challenges in life. And I can appreciate that.
There's a saying, and I don't know who said it, but it basically says, if I say I can't, and in this case, we can say, well, if I say I can't, or I don't have time, or, I can't afford that, or, and I understand being able to afford certain things, and not being able to afford certain things. But the saying says, if I say I don't have time for something or something similar to this, then basically what I'm saying is I don't want to.
Yeah.
And, when you're talking about, values and value systems,
Mhm.
I like the fact that you're an existentialist because, this is what meaning is all about.
Mhm.
And if I have what they call false meaning,
Mhm.
the things that I attribute value to these things of false meaning, and this is exactly what social media is.
Mhm.
Um, it's a lifestyle, it's a presentation of how I need to look, it's a presentation of the cars, the house, the schools that my kids are in, the relationship that I have with my significant other. It is a portrayal of something that is not, that's false.
Yeah.
And so this is where if we have these clients, I'm sure you've had some of these clients that are very insightful, very intelligent,
Mhm.
um, and you're able to kind of dig into these issues with them, and they really find great benefit to this because they're kind of hitting these brick walls, but they need to get into that knowing their self. And the best way to do that is to discuss, what do I put value on? What has meaning in my life? Am I placing a whole lot of meaning on these things that are false? Wealth, position, my education. Not to say that
Yeah.
these are not good things, but if I say, "Oh, you have to call me doctor,"
Yeah.
you know, and I've seen this happen where there's like, people that insist that you call me doctor,
Yeah.
because I earned it. Well,
Yeah.
this very much is false meaning.
Yeah.
And so, and not to say that some things that we place meaning on are not important. Family, relationships, our careers, things like this, these are important. But in terms of being transitory, those things could go away at the snap of a finger. And it's kind of like the person who, and I have respect for this, when their child passes away, that's a terribly difficult situation, but your life is continuing. And then, or if a spouse passes away, well, my life is over too, because I put so much value into that, so much meaning into that. I had no meaning within myself. My job, I get fired from my job, so I go off and I kill myself.
Yeah.
Um, or I retired from a job, so now my life has no meaning anymore. These are transitory things that we have to kind of understand.
Yes.
Like, as soon as you start applying too much value on these things, then that's where you begin losing yourself and the ability to kind of find that spiritual part of yourself to
Yeah.
say, what is my purpose here? You know,
Yeah.
so this is something I think we need to strive for, and we
Yeah.
help our clients get to.
Yeah, excellent, and great point on that. As far as this idea of the idealized self of like this image that I'm trying to portray. Maybe it's a function of expectations from society, pop culture, or all this sensational stuff that is all part of that the distractedness of social media. And you're right. Hey, I'm out at this restaurant, or we're doing this, and the whole selfie thing. And when I had my personal page, I did a lot of the fitness stuff, and it was a reflection of something I value a lot in my life. But to be honest, yeah, there's this is a part of kind of like an identity, right? But being selective of what you want to show people, there's a lot to be said about that, right? So how congruent or how real is that? Like you're saying, this false self, maybe it's just more idealized. It's not really truly who you are behind the scenes when nobody's watching. Yeah.
This is when you talked about that, typically this happens in separations too, is, or if there's a breakup, or, oh, I'm going to stop doing this so that you'll come back to me,
Yeah.
or so you won't leave me.
Mhm.
This is, not to get too much into it, but, this is very much first order change.
Yeah.
And that is, that's something that is not long lasting.
Yeah.
And it's important for people to understand what the difference is between those things. And it's like, I'm changing for that purpose.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like you mentioned, when that goes away, then the reasoning behind it all goes away as well. And so, it's a really valuable concept. And I think people, as therapists, we need to understand it really well, so that we can help people get to a place where they understand what that is too.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, so yeah, ambivalence, readiness to change. As far as seeing that not just in our field, but just in the context of society. I had to make a joke. Let's say we hadn't figured out how a lot of this works. I'm sure we would still do it today, but I always make a joke. It's like, would we really be motivated to be curious about the, how everything works with astronomy? In this day and age, people would be growing up playing video games, Netflix, going to watch movies. They'd be busy taking selfies. And so we may not have advanced in certain areas to the extent we had, if not for the removal of all this stuff that wasn't around.
Right.
All that time ago.
Yeah, that's a good topic. And, a minute ago, you were talking about, kind of happiness.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came to mind, I'd seen many videos on this, and I'm kind of a YouTube fanatic.
Yeah.
Where I'm always watching and trying to always learn some new concept. And, back in the day when we were in college, it was kind of like, okay, go to the, to the library and learn these new things. And then, now it's like at our fingertips, but this idea of happiness is something that keeps people in a negative place as well. I like to encourage my clients to try to get away from that. Okay, what am I doing to seek happiness? Because the comment is, okay, if I can't have this thing, or if I can't have this relationship, or if she leaves me, I can't be happy without this person, or without my job, or without this level of income. But cling to the idea of contentment. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having wealth and having, the things that bring you joy, and happiness is great. But to get to a place of contentment, and there's this idea, this word, and I hope I'm saying it right, is eudaimonia. Mm-hmm. And it's a Greek term that it applies to that kind of feeling of contentment. And the way I describe it to my clients is, you're one of two kinds of person. When your house is burning down and you're in the front yard, of course you're not happy, but you may be that person that is just in tears and devastated because of the things that you're losing. Or you may be that person that's in this place of contentment because you're like, I'm not in that house burning down, And I think a lot of people, it doesn't matter. I mean, when COVID hit and we were counseling people all over the world, there was this kind of like lack of contentment in people, this isolation. And that's one of the other things that I really encourage people to think about is what you get from that isolation. And a lot of individuals, they don't like being alone. And of course, that might be their personality. They might be an introvert. They might be an extrovert. And they may say, no, I'm an extrovert, so I can't stand being alone. Well, ultimately, when it comes down to it, I had a discussion with a client and I said, have you ever been in a one-on-one with someone that's very angry, or a one-on-one where someone's very critical? And that is the worst company. Yeah. But what you have to ask yourself when you're alone is, do I not like being alone because I don't like the company? And maybe I'm not enjoying this time of being alone because I'm critical, because I'm angry, because I'm having these kind of negative characteristics that are coming through with myself. And when I'm alone, it's even kind of a highlight on the fact of the areas of my personality that I need to work on,
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of the, speaking of existential crisis, right? Pandemic 2020, I was already headed in the direction to do online teletherapy, if you will. And then, of course, pandemic happens. It just expedited that much quicker. So, yeah, people had fear and anxiety all at the same time. March 2020, I believe, the government says you got to stay home. You can't go anywhere. There's this virus. They didn't know a lot at that point, other than it was already in New York, and it could be a bad thing. You get really sick. You could die. So people are perceiving an immediate threat, fear, but also this uncertainty, anxiety about the future because of potential problems now. Will I have a job in 6 months? What's going to happen? It was an election year, a lot of change, controversy, and so on. And to make it even better, pun intended, right? what within people's regular, predictable, available options of things they normally control got whittled down and taken away. Can't go to the gym no more. You can't be at a restaurant. You can't go see a movie. You can't be in groups of 8 or more people, something like that. You can't be in a park. Just basically stay home. You can't even get a haircut. Hey, but you can take your dog to the dog groomer, right? I never understood that logic, but anyways, yeah, that lady in Dallas. Anyways, yeah. So yeah. So when people tend to be under fear, high stress, or a high alert of anxiety, and then they have limited options of what they control, they tend to focus on whatever they can control. And I made a joke in a video at that time about the toilet paper buying, because that's exactly what that was about. It was something they had control over. I bought this toilet paper. I'm feeling less anxious because I'm acting on something, right? Even though we know all the ass wipe or toilet paper in the world is not going to protect you from the virus. And even the argument of running out, it was not rational, because they never said you couldn't go to the grocery store to buy toilet paper, right? So
as a fitness expert, I think you will appreciate the concern that so many people had of catching a virus, but at the same time, it's like, oh, I'm going to pour all this poisonous sugar into my body.
That's right.
And I'm killing myself every day.
Yeah.
As opposed to, oh, I might go out and catch a virus.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Talk about some discrepancies there. One thing about the what we control, right? Don't always be quick to assume things about people, or pass too much judgment, because put yourself in another person's place when you literally are losing everything, crumbling around you. You'd be surprised. Maybe we're not always the most rational person in a very acute, stressful situation with limited options of what you can do on something. So anyways, ideas with what we control in this world, radical acceptance, and maybe focusing more on what we have control over in a healthier way,
right?
Rather than exclusively focusing on things we don't control. Some of those things that are temporal, right? They can be gone, like you said. Yeah.
Well, I tell everyone, the most difficult thing you'll do in this life is gain control of your own mind. Mm-hmm. Because especially if you are coming from a very volatile background, where you were coping and adapting to survive, and your mind had to operate in certain ways to get through certain circumstances and situations. And, this is the challenge for all of us, and like we talked about, getting our shit together. Yeah. The benefit is being able to say, okay, I see that this is a weakness and I need to start gaining control over the way I think about these things. Mm-hmm. So.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, that's good stuff. And I don't want to take up too much of your time on a Saturday.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of rabbit holes we could go down.
No doubt. We could go on all day, man.
Yeah, just on psych triage alone back in the day with
next time
all the interactions we had.
IPA here next to me, and we can just sit here all day.
I know. Hey, well, perhaps maybe what would be
cut that out.
So let me ask you a wrap-up question. Maybe it might be a summary of some of the bullet points of a lot of the wisdom you just imparted today, that people can benefit from, and maybe just challenge people at a minimum to really think. So what would be something, maybe something you would like to communicate to whoever's watching this video, as far as maybe what would be some general wisdom or advice about maybe if they have ambivalence with making some changes, something they're struggling with, or just this idea, maybe happiness, right? Maybe just a final thought on that. Yeah.
Well, like I said, I have great respect for your expertise in the fitness area. This is probably something you've seen people do, where they try to make a whole bunch of big changes in one moment, and then 3 or 4 weeks later it goes away. In regards to, our mental strength, our emotional and psychological strength, the best thing we can do is take hold of one small concept and apply that concept every day, mm-hmm. throughout the day. And then when we become proficient at that, then take another one. So for example, I urge my clients to say, look, it's one small mental exercise that you're doing for yourself. If you say, I'm going to, listen to maybe certain beneficial podcasts every time I get in the car on my way to work, this is 15 minutes of growth and therapy that I'm doing for myself. and do that every day consistently, or take this one concept of dichotomy of control and apply that throughout your day. I had a guy that set an alarm for himself, and he said, when I was at work, the alarm would go off and I would ask myself, am I upset about something I have no control over?
Yeah.
And so he says, by the time I got home, my stress level was down to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was able to kind of begin these positive things of exercising and eating right. And he wasn't stress eating, and he wasn't fighting with the wife in the way he used to. So this is like when you talk about, well, I'm going to start off with a 20-pound dumbbell,
Yeah.
at least you're picking it up and you're doing it every day, and this is the thing, this is the idea. Take one small bite, make sure that you can swallow that bite every single day. Next week, take another one, take another one, take another one, take another one. Before you know it, those things become part of your daily routine, and they become almost ritual to you. So this would be my encouragement to people.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that, David, and I appreciate your time. I have respect for you as well, for everything you've done throughout your life and what you're continuing to do. And perhaps we can have some future conversations. And if you hear a dog whimpering, that's the Labrador I adopted. He's about 5 or 6 years old. Yeah, his previous owner passed away, so I adopted this golden Labrador Retriever. And yeah, he can let himself. He's smart. He can let himself in the office. He nudges the door open, then he'll leave, and then he makes little rounds of the house, like he's like a perimeter check, and then he comes back upstairs. So anyway,
very cool.
Yeah. So anyways, a little tangent, because I can hear them, so I'm assuming people listening to this video are going to hear a dog. That's my dog.
For sure.
So so in the future, maybe we get together some more. Thank you for watching today, and if you haven't watched the first video, it'll be there. So David, again, I appreciate your time, sir, and have a good day.
Thank you, James. Take care, man.